listening to the very packed RAAC Community Theater. I hope you guys are comfortable because this is a very special evening. It has been 20 years since the first No Ordinary Person show. And I'll tell you, for 19 of those years, the show was directed by an amazing woman, Joyce Wenger. Joyce isn't here tonight. She was here last night. But when she decided she was going to step down from being director this year, it took 4 of us to take her place. So that's me, Ed, and Lynn Dolnick, and Dick Raines. It's been fun to work with my partners in crime. So.
I know everybody knows you, but...
And I'm Sally. I was thinking about the way I listen to stories on the radio. I don't know if any of you do this, particularly in my car. I listen to the Moth Radio Hour and PRX, and I am always just stunned by the rich variety of human experience. And I'm also really struck by the sheer pleasure of entering into other people's reality through their stories. So I think that's really how we connect with people. I mean, in all aspects of our lives. We do it in little stories, big stories, serious stories, funny stories. But we usually, often, it's one-on-one, and no ordinary person gives us the chance to do it all together as a community. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. So tonight, you're going to hear from Joyce Wenger, Bud Meyer, Jim Northup, and Betsy, Dietel, and Michael Sains. And I'll just give you a little heads up. After Bud's story, we're going to have a 10-minute intermission. So now it's time to sit back and relax and do your job, which is to listen and to receive these offerings from your friends and neighbors.
I was on my way to South Korea. I was really excited about another international adventure. Thanks to Mike's Air Force career, in 1986 we had already lived in 8 different places in the United States, and we had just spent 3 years living and traveling in Europe. We hadn't been to Asia, but we'd read extensively about life and customs in Korea, and we were seasoned travelers. Or so I thought. I had been in Korea for just a week, so I was pleased when my downstairs neighbor and landlady, Mrs. O, and her son, Se-kyung, knocked on my door. They gently bowed and then offered me a bowl of rice custard. Using hand motions, they urged me to fill 3 small bowls. I'd already observed that Mrs. O, who was just about my age, 36, was the jokester among the women on our street. When she talked wildly, waving her hands and arms, she made everyone laugh, and she always seemed to be the center of attention. Her son, Se-kyung, a senior in high school, was much more reserved, and he knew some English, which his parents did not. They'd come to ask if I could tutor Se-kyung. I was impressed that he cared so much about his education. He left every morning at 5 a.m. for an hour-long bus ride to Seoul to go to the best school. And it seemed like he spent most of his free time studying. And he was cute, too. We agreed that he would come by whenever he had time for English tutoring. With our business completed, we began to eat Mrs. O's custard. And I have to say, it was all I could do to swallow it. This dessert was clumpy and tasteless and not sweet. And what kind of a dessert isn't sweet? I spooned the leftover dessert into an empty jar and dumped it down the trash bin, that ran from our balcony down to the street. Yeah, I know, you figured that out. The next morning, I saw Mrs. O washing my glass jar as she hosed down her patio. I had no idea that Koreans were so frugal as to sort the trash for reusable items. I was so embarrassed. Did she think I was wasteful? Or the ugly American? What impression was I giving her about Americans? About a week later came Christmas Day. We were almost ready to join the American pilots in their dorm at the Korean Air Force Base to which Mike was assigned. We were going to try making an American Christmas in a dorm room, roast a turkey, and cheer up the homesick guys. Most pilots came to Korea for a year without their families. Mike had come on such a bachelor tour, but I had joined him by purchasing my own commercial airline ticket, and then we lived off base in a Korean neighborhood, renting the top floor of the O's house. I was the first wife in the squadron to do this, and since I was about 10 years older than most of the lieutenants in the dorm, over time, I became known among the bachelors as Mom. Mike and I were almost ready to leave, and we're sitting on our traditional low Korean couch with our knees up to our chins, opening our gifts. Mr. O came up and motioned that he had to flush out the water pipes. On Christmas morning, the O's were Buddhist. Anyway, I have to tell you, we weren't sure what Mr. O thought of us because of the Yantan incident. The Yantan incident. Our house was heated with yantan. I'm not talking about wonton, but yantan. They are large, soft, cold discs that are stacked in a cylindrical furnace and then burned to heat water that circulated under the floor. Heated floors were absolutely wonderful. As my husband Mike can attest, it's the only time in my whole life that I've had warm feet. But the yantan gave the whole country an unpleasant, coal-like smell, and it caused everything to be covered in a film of gritty black dirt, even our lungs. But back to the incident. Mike had arrived in Korea a couple of weeks before I did and had paid Mrs. O to swap out our burned out yantan when she replaced theirs with fresh coal. This meant going into the hot and carbon monoxide filled basement furnace room every 8 hours and leaning into the hot furnace using long tongs, lifting the old burned yantan out and putting new in. This was considered a wife's job. But after I arrived, Mike asked that Mrs. O continue tending our furnace too. When Mr. O finally understood, the look of pity on his face suggested that Mike was a sad excuse of a husband, unable to get his wife, me, to do her proper job. So, when he came up on Christmas morning, we just sat back and stayed out of his way. As we watched him, however, I was appalled when he took the handheld bathtub sprayer and sprayed everything in the path on the way to the drain. My box of cosmetics, our Kleenex, our towels, the rugs on the floor, everything was drenched. No, we didn't stop him. We didn't want him to think we were rude. But can you blame me? I was really infuriated with Mr. O. Then I thought he was probably just thinking we were really stupid. Who would keep all those things in a bathroom? A bathroom in Korea was meant to be just one big shower. The issue of a wife's role came up in other contexts as well. No Korean woman ever asked me why we did not have children, and Korean men never really talked with me at all. Mike, on the other hand, was asked lots of times why we didn't have children. Mike tried to explain that we just didn't want children, but philosophical discussions using sign language and dictionaries were just too difficult. So, Mike changed his tactics and vaguely implied that I had some sort of a biological problem and couldn't have children. We thought that would solve the problem, but then one neighbor asked him why he didn't just divorce me. After that, Mike described these wonderful little boys that we had in boarding school back then. Whatever the Korean expectation of wives was, I had no intention of staying home and tending the Yantan. Not long after our arrival, I spoke with the country manager of Digital Equipment Corporation, an American, about a sales opening they had. The manager reviewed my resume and commented that my credentials were excellent, but then said he could not offer me a job. But I thought you just said I was qualified. Oh, yes, Mrs. Wenger, but after all, you're a woman. But that's irrelevant. Mrs. Wenger, you don't understand. Meetings are held and deals are done in the men's bathhouse. I could not picture myself discussing computer sales in a room full of naked men. Of course, I wouldn't have been admitted anyway. So after that, I searched only for technical positions and ended up with a wonderful job with the U.S. Army developing what we would now call apps for the joint American-Korean intel community. One hot and humid early spring afternoon, Mrs. O came upstairs and pointed to my windows and then motioned for me to hurry up and follow her. I hadn't a clue what was going on, but she grabbed my hand and dragged me down the street to the bus stop. I had easily mastered the buses while traveling in England and France and Germany. And even though I memorized the Hangul alphabet and the Korean words for restaurant and Suwon, our city, and the market area, I still couldn't figure out how to pay the bus fare. So I was really grateful to have Mrs. O as my guide. When we arrived at one of the market areas, she took me directly into one little shop. Actually, just a wooden platform that was covered with piles of fabric. Nothing like Joanne's fabric shop, but I guessed that we were out to buy curtains before the real heat of summer began. While I selected fabric, Mrs. O, of course, entertained a crowd of people who I'm sure were eager to hear about me, the Miguk, or foreigner, weird foreigner, being perhaps the only American civilian in our whole city of 1 million people. Afterwards, we sat back on piles of fabric and drank cups of extremely strong, sweet coffee and watched the young seamstress sew curtains that magically fit our windows in just a half hour. Emboldened by my excursion, the next week I decided to take the bus into the market all by myself to buy a table. Without Mrs. O, I felt everyone's eyes on me. Even in a country that loved Americans, it felt strange to be such a visible minority, feeling like people were always looking at me and whispering. In Talmadge, Ohio, where I grew up, being different was just someone who went to a different church. When we lived in England, if I didn't speak, I could look pretty British. But here, I was at least a foot taller than anyone else on the bus. I had lighter skin, a longer nose, different eyes, and I probably smelled. Americans exude a different odor from eating and drinking dairy, which Koreans rarely do. You may have heard about the white-gloved Asian bus assistants cramming people into buses like sausages. That's absolutely true. But did you also know that Koreans eat garlic like popcorn? So the odor of tightly packed, sweaty bodies, seasoned with the omnipresent smell of garlic, was nauseating. Believe me, it was a relief to get off that hot bus and breathe fresh, Yantan-smelling air. I suppose the Koreans probably appreciated that I took my cheese smell off the bus too. So I wandered through the crowded shops and stalls that smelled like spices and fish and cooking food, shops that sold everything you can imagine. There were beautiful, expensive, traditional women's dresses called hanboks. These are long, elegant dresses of beautiful textured silk in vivid colors. There were stalls selling plastic wash bases, fruit and vegetables, and another stall selling shoes woven out of grasses and worn mostly by old men. You could buy batteries in one shop and in the very next one buy a bra. I watched a clerk hold a sheet up as a makeshift dressing room so her customer could remove her blouse to try on a bra. Eventually, even I had to buy a bra. I continued wandering through the maze of shops until I finally found an area with folded tables hanging from the ceiling. Korean tables are made of this beautiful, dark, glossy wood, and they stand about 10 inches high. You sit on the floor when you use them to eat, then fold the legs up when you're done, slide the table under the couch so you can use the room for other purposes. I had settled on a simple, inexpensive design and pointed. I had my dictionary and pencil and paper, like always, but I was encouraged that my hand motions had seemed to work just fine. I was now ready to negotiate the price, which was a big deal for me since I'd never negotiated a purchase before. But no. First, we had to discuss how many people were in my family. I blurted out dual, 2, and then was stuck in this endless back and forth discussing what I chose, apparently a 6-person table, with what I should have chosen, a 2-person table. The merchant finally gave in, shaking his head at this crazy American as he sold me a table fit for a large family, which, by the way, measured a grand 2 feet by 3 feet. I was, nonetheless, pretty proud of my accomplishment, and I was beginning to find it fun to explore on my own. As I learned with the table vendor, our American sense of space and scale was a constant source of amusement for the Koreans we met. I remember the day Mrs. O first brought a friend of hers up to see the American bed we were using instead of her tongues. They chatted and giggled about the queen-size bed that took up the entire room. Then they went into our second bedroom, which we used as a closet. It had 2 dressers on opposite walls with a rack on top of each for hanging clothes and just enough room in the middle to open the drawers. This time they guffawed. Our bedrooms became a routine stop for Mrs. I like to think that Mrs. O appreciated our clever storage concepts, but maybe they were simply and absurdly funny. I'm also pretty sure that Mrs. O never understood why we had a whole house for just 2 people. 2 people at that who both worked every day and thus left the house empty most of the time. The O's son, Se-kyung, came by for tutoring very frequently, and I loved this. He actually knew quite a bit of English, so he mostly just wanted to practice speaking, which was great for me because then I could ask him questions about things I was interested in, like Korean culture and his life. He was supposed to learn from me, but I know I learned so much more from him. One day, another American pilot's wife was leaving our house and passed Se-kyung on the stairs. Penny was young, about 25, with beautiful, long, blonde hair. She hated it when Korean women stopped her to run their hands through her hair. A Korean man would never do that, and Se-kyung certainly didn't touch her. But when he came in my door, the first thing he said was, "Your friend is beautiful. Is she a virgin?" Charades were not going to work for this discussion. And neither did my dictionary. So we left the topic with Se-kyung promising me that if he ever met another American woman, he would not ask her if she was a virgin. Months later, a Korean friend told me that being unmarried, being a virgin, being childless, all blended together into one concept. Se-kyung just wanted to know if Penny was available. When no men were present, Korean women had a wonderful ease and intimacy with each other that I observed so often in my house, in Mrs. O's house, and even on the street. I envied it. Growing up with parents of German and Swedish heritage, I was generally a private person and not very demonstrative. just the opposite of Korean women. As I was growing up, showering after gym class, for example, was a horribly embarrassing experience for most all of us, whether or not we were mature or endowed or thin. Picture me in junior high school after the required shower, trying to dry and dress behind a towel that I held between my teeth. Imagine then when a Korean friend took me to the local women's bathhouse. When we arrived, we hung all of our clothes on hooks, everything, and then went from station to station in the buff. I thought about just running when I first stepped in, but I couldn't embarrass my friend. We moved from one station to the next, bathing, cold soaking, hot soaking, having my friend suds my back with soap, getting a massage in the middle of a room full of women, cutting their toenails or each other's with 30 women looking on. As it turned out, the other women all made me feel comfortable, and the afternoon turned out to be quite delightful. Except for one thing, the exfoliating rub-down with what felt like a steel wool pan. I made darn sure to skip that step at later visits. Our last week in Korea, Se-kyung came up with pencil and paper, which he often did, or which he usually did when it was time to pay a bill, which we shared. This day, he came up without a bill and nonchalantly told me, "Before you leave, you owe us $25 for filth." Bill! My heart sank. Were they really going to hire a cleaning service because we were dirty? I know I didn't hose down the balcony nearly as often as Mrs. O did, but we honestly thought we kept our tiny house very clean. I quickly paid him, but said I did not understand and that he needed to help me figure out what Mike and I might have done. Filth, dirty, grimy, soiled, unwashed, foul. These were the horrible words we found in the dictionary. But Se-kyung and I kept at it, and one word led to another, until finally it jumped out at us. Filth translated to the annual sewer bill that would arrive after we left. What a relief. As we started packing to resume our lives back in the U.S., I thought about the situations I'd had to navigate over the past year. I'd adjusted to having neighbors walk in on me by knocking and opening the door at the same time. So, I learned to lock the door when I was in the bathroom. I'd learned to enjoy having women act like our house was just as much their house as it was mine. Sometimes going into my kitchen to find a neighbor stirring a pot on my stove while Mrs. O entertained her. I'd learned not to be embarrassed by women touching me to feel my blouse or grabbing my hands to check out my red nail polish. I discovered that life was quite possible without a washer and dryer, and with no oven other than our small toaster oven. Although baking cookies for the squadron did take a whole long evening, I got used to changing clothes at work in the summer to drive the hour to and from Seoul in shorts in 100-degree humid heat with no air conditioner. In winter, I got used to hanging a blanket across the front door to keep the humidity from freezing the door shut. I adjusted to living in a tiny house of 500 square feet. I got used to the smell of burning yarn-time and the grittiness it coated everything with. I've come to like the salty ocean smells of the fish market, even though I often couldn't tell if I was buying vegetables or something. And I've come to accept that desserts were never going to be sweet. I also reflected on the Korean people we met, who were fun, full of laughter, welcoming, and open. And I realized that after a year in their home, I love these people, and I truly could have stayed forever.
Just plain Midwestern. Hannibal, Missouri, nonetheless boldly declares itself America's hometown. Lucky for Hannibal, Mark Twain's boyhood there presaged the adventures of Tom, Huck, and Betty. Ever since, the Globe's literary pilgrims find their way to the house on Hill Street with the whitewashed fence. Lucky for me, Hannibal is also my hometown. I'm the 5th of 8 kids, a baby boomlet of 4 boys and 4 girls born from 1946 to 1964. Our mother was the eldest Paradise. The Paradise family lived on Pleasant Street. In America's hometown. I know it, right? We Myers had much to live up to. Our father was a small-town rarity, both dashing naval officer and Notre Dame graduate. Of course, he married Hannibal's prettiest gal. Oddly, we called them Mother and Daddy. Daddy served in the South Pacific, then came back to raise Holsteins on a dairy south of town. We kids played hide and seek in the hayloft and built tree houses in the 2-acre yard. The music room in our farmhouse devolved into a toy room littered with Lincoln logs and tinker toys and easy-bake ovens. We had so many contests. First to the mailbox on Highway 61, fastest down the banister, cleanest after the rotten tomato fights with the cousins in the fall garden. When I turned 8, we moved into town to a white frame house on Virginia Street, right next to Daddy's folks. The hardest thing about city living, learning to drink store-bought milk. Naturally, we were Catholic. On Sundays, the Meyer clan, 10 strong, filled an entire pew in Blessed Sacrament, right behind Daddy's folks. The Meyer siblings had brains, looks, and personality. Firstborn, National Merit Scholar, high bar. Number 2 broke a glass ceiling. First female chosen as commencement speaker in Hannibal High. She and number 3 were cheerleaders for the Mighty Mighty Pirates, back before Title IX. My brothers were 2 and 3 sport lettermen. Several Myers vied for Tom and Bet, Hannibal's teenage ambassadors, chosen each 4th of July. Many a yearbook featured a Meyer portrait among the kings and queens. In summertime, we ruled the pool, filling all age brackets on local swim teams, traveling in the family station wagon to meets across the Midwest. It was apt training, for the Meyer clan was destined to serve for a generation as Hannibal's perpetually tan lifeguards. Lifeguard, the coolest teen job. Perched in white towers, looking good in skimpy red speedos. Silver whistles glinted. The Myers were the town's icons of pubescent authority. All but me. My Hall of Fame dreams died at age 14. That's when my joints turned traitor. It was 1968. That wounded year of riots and assassinations in America was for me one of sudden and mysterious pain. Now up to then I was a jock too. I made the McCooey, junior, 8th grade basketball and track teams, and I proudly wore the shamrock green. But we knew something was off kilter well before my joints rebelled. My earliest memory, I might have been 3 or 4, was a trip to the Children's Hospital in St. Louis. Just me in the back seat of the station wagon, mother and daddy up front. We returned with a metal brace they clamped to my shoes just before I went to bed each night. There were other signs. My paperboy brothers flew up Hannibal's hills on their bikes. I walked by them. My green and yellow swimming ribbons clashed with the Klan's blues and reds. In a family of stars, the 5th of 8 was Benchwarmer. Virtually overnight, I stiffened like the Tin Man. First hips, then knees, then elbows. It hurt. It still does. But to peek ahead in this happy story for a second, I sit here on the cusp of age 65, a veteran of 50 years of coming to terms with this condition. Well, that's because I'm the beneficiary of years of orthopedic wizardry. Older and still vertical, for now. Bionic Bud goes with humor. Hi there, this is my wife and I'm her pre-existing condition. I'm so proud to be one of Mountainside Physical Therapy's repeat offenders. I tick off a litany of surgical work. This thumb, 2 replaced hips, 3 new knees, and 5 vertebrae. Whoa, 3 knees? Of course, the brain transplant. See, I made you think. Physical pain isn't all I felt. At 14, I was certain that I'd never get to be this old. I was also sure I was staring at bachelorhood. And if you're built like me, you know the stares and the whispers. You've heard the beautiful word. Well, those folks mean well. Others, one big-bellied Christian followed me out of the courthouse recently and bellowed, "What's wrong with your back?" Though it is obvious, notice my elbows, this immobile neck. It is also obvious to me that I am more than okay with this. After all, I share the splendor of Rappahannock with you. Retired and way too busy, stunningly married for 22 years this month to a quick-smart, blue-eyed, blonde Ann Robinson. Saint Anne, I should say, patron saint of patience. But this journey has been one of painful steps. Is it a disability? I never thought so. More of an inconvenience. Who needs those blue tags from the rear view mirror? Not me. Not for now. I ignore this physical condition until forced to acknowledge it. When I drop something on the floor, say a $20 bill, I can't pick it up. If that happens in front of somebody, there's a very awkward moment. I start to explain and then ask for help, and often get it. Going through airport security, you've heard male assist. Well, that's for me. Every time. Before the invasive TSA pat-down, the agent says, spread your feet, turn your palms up and arms out. And I do. And they say, no, palms up, arms up. I say, well, look, I'm doing it. here's how I remember what happened the year that I turned 14. At a weekend ice skating party in Hannibal. Daddy had played hockey at Notre Dame, and that day, as we passed the puck, he taught us how to hit a slap shot. When one of his ricocheted off my ankle, I crumbled. That afternoon, old Doc Porter quietly told Daddy he didn't like what he saw on the x-rays. The stiffness arrived soon after. We Meyer boys were classmates and teammates with a nearby family of 6 boys. That spring, those fellows got a heavy lifting job knocking down a school carnival at Blessed Sacrament. And needing one more able body, they picked me. I asked for a break at mid-morning. By 2 o'clock, I sat stepping off to the side, embarrassed. At 5, the brothers argued before handing me a share. I shuffled home in pain and in tears. We got a call that night, and it was for me. Their mother wanted me to know that she added me to her prayers. Now, puberty is embarrassing enough, right? Raging hormones and budding breasts. By 9th grade, we Catholics entered the public junior high. I limped down the long corridors. I pulled myself up the stairs using the handrails awkwardly. For a time, I hung out with the cool clique, and then overnight, I didn't. Picture me at the country club dance lessons, the sapling at the end of the boys' line, facing a forest of perfumed beauties, in the short skirts of the time, legs bound to here. Still, sports kept their allure. I figured being cowboy made me part of the football team, right? Not exactly. After their showers, the linemen used me for target practice with their soggy missiles. So, sidelined, I tried different pursuits. Class plays, student government. I got an after-school job making deliveries for the neighborhood pharmacy in an orange Ford Pinto. I saw the real Hannibal, the working class town beyond the whitewashed historic district at the edge of Mark Twain's magnificent Mississippi, rolling its mile-wide tide along, rolling in the sun. But delivering pills, booze, and Trojans to back doors in all neighborhoods, rich and poor, revealed the true life Hannibal. I understood how Huck Finn's adventures there were more dark than light. It was Mother, who we would later call Joanne, who prodded me to join the student newspaper. Well, she said, you can write about it. I joined the sports staff. My parents and I were to take many more hospital trips, each ending in questions. The summer I was 17, we trekked to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Finally, a diagnosis. The doctors used such words as sudden, juvenile arthritic, formerly spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia. For the rest of his life, Daddy kept that term folded on a piece of paper in his wallet. Now, I should have viewed all of that alone time with the parents of 8 as a privilege. Instead, I felt Catholic guilt. I barely got a whiff of resentment from my siblings, but you bet it stung a little bit when my brothers left the house with their pals to go run after-school pass patterns without me. All 8 of us would attend the University of Missouri, Mizzou. As a freshman, I was assigned a dank ground floor dorm room where special needs students were ghettoized. I met my first college roommate there, a wheelchair paraplegic ex-cop. His holstered gun had misfired while on duty, shattering his spine at age 25. After one semester, I mainstreamed myself and transferred to a dorm with co-ed dining. Now the Meyer clan's sibling rivalry is strong. It's like the Force, part faith, part attaboy, and all competition. And it wasn't always friendly. We squabbled. I overcompensated. I crowed when I made the dean's list. At least I could do that. I pushed myself past physical limits. There was a calculus to that. Walking too far meant I'd arrive drenched in sweat. Going 4 extra blocks meant I'd ache all day. I hobbled to the farthest point of campus, to geology class. I gimped to my library job even in winter. Disco was the rage at the college bars. I stayed in, listening to the Cardinals on KMOX, Jack Buck calling me. In Spanish class one day, I stumbled upon a phrase that would become like a mantra for life. Vale la pena. It means worth the pain. My junior year, I entered the oldest in the nation, highly competitive Missouri School of Journalism. City desk at the Columbia Missourian meant prestige. I opted for sports desk, where I stayed late for West Coast games, corrected box scores, and crusaded against cliches. When the top news writing professor picked me to be his teaching assistant, you bet I wrote home. I was one of the offbeat guys. We took beery, hazy road trips in, what else, VW microbus. I don't think I ever blacked out. I hitchhiked to St. Louis for Dylan and the band, to Kansas City for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I moved off campus. My roommates had girlfriends, not me. Who did they leave? The Meyer clan returned to Virginia Street in those years to work and pay for next semester. We parked like 7 Volkswagens out front of the house one summer. I remained the outlier Meyer. While the other 7 donned their Speedos and zinc oxide, I had the palest job one summer, state employment clerk, button-down shirt and tie. But I later interned at the Courier Post, the daily newspaper where Samuel Langhorne Clemens himself had been a printer still. Graduation approached, time to light out for the territory. For me, Florida was a no-brainer. The Sunshine State, warm year-round. And in the midst of a recession, there were rumors of jobs. I flew to Tampa on spring break. It was my first trip on a jet. I left each job interview certain no one would hire me. Who would want me? Yet I got a call 2 months later from a sports editor, Chuck Rhodes. My older brother and I drove south from America's hometown to subtropical Fort Myers in my used yellow VW. It didn't have air conditioning in Florida. I didn't care. I was a working journalist on my own. It was my turn to tan.
an ordinary person. I've had a very interesting life. I served as a national park ranger and later a park superintendent for 37 years in 10 different national parks. Now, many people do not have a very good understanding of what national park rangers really do. Many people think we only lead nature walks or sit out in a pasture under a tree Ferdinand the bull. However, the group of rangers that I worked with over the course of most of my career, referred to as protection rangers, perform law enforcement, emergency medical services, search and rescue, and fight wildland fires. And at the end of a career, I've usually seen and done a lot. So tonight I'm going to tell you 3 short ranger tales I hope you will enjoy. My first story is called The Saving of Dennis Jones, or boy, it sure is loud in here. I was a ranger at Grand Teton National Park from 1987 to 1992. My family and I lived at Moose, the National Park Service community at park headquarters, about 15 miles north of the famous town of Jackson, Wyoming. There were about 100 people who lived in Moose, some single folks, and about 30 couples and families. Now, Grand Teton is a spectacular place, one of the most beautiful landscapes in all of North America. But, as you might imagine, while the winters in Grand Teton are beautiful, they are long and hard. There is snow on the ground from mid-November until well into late April or May, and it is cold, often well below zero. And being fairly far north, the winter days are short. So winters take their toll, and after a few years of living in Moose, I came to understand that towards the end of a long winter, depression began to impact a lot of people and their families, particularly folks who were not inclined to get out and play in the snow. So cabin fever is a very real thing, but not something the public would ever really think about impacting people living in such a beautiful and iconic place. Early one spring morning, while still at home, I got a phone call from the spouse of a park employee who lived just down the street from me. Dennis Jones is not his real name. His wife told me Dennis had been very depressed and had left the house that morning with a gun, told her that he was going to kill himself, and drove away in his Volkswagen Beetle. She thought he might drive up to the top of Shadow Mountain, a peak just outside the park, which was one of his favorite places. I contacted my boss, the district ranger, and with a strong sense of urgency, we drove towards the top of Shadow Mountain, a few miles away. We parked our vehicle just short of the summit and walked the rest of the way to avoid being observed. As we approached the summit, a large open grassy area about the size of a football field, there was Dennis's car. We could see him sitting in the driver's seat. Now, I should mention Dennis was not a stranger to me. We had worked together for several years. We were neighbors. We talked frequently, and while we were not close friends, I felt there was a level of trust between us. The district ranger and I took up separate positions at the edge of the woods to observe, and we had agreed not to talk on the radio since Dennis might also have a park radio with him. From my position, I determined that I could approach the right rear of Dennis's car without being observed to assess the situation. Very quietly, I traversed the open meadow to the right rear of the car. The passenger side window was slightly open. The driver's side window was down most of the way. I could see the gun was lying in the passenger seat. Dennis was focused on writing a suicide note against the steering wheel. He had not yet seen me. It was obvious there was no time to waste or a chance to coordinate with my partner who was back in the woods. Believing that I could connect with Dennis, believing that he would talk to me, I came up along the passenger side of the car just behind the window and said, "Dennis, don't do this." He turned, saw me, and I will never forget the empty, dark space I saw in his eyes. From that instant, a series of events unfolded that I had no time to think about. As soon as he saw me, Dennis locked the doors on his car and closed the passenger side window. As he began to wind up the driver's side window, I ran around the back of the car and tried to use my strength to prevent him from closing the window. But he was too strong, and I had to pull my hands off the top edge of the glass just before they got pinched and caught. At this moment, Dennis reached across to the passenger side seat and picked up the handgun. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I believe at that moment a power greater than myself guided my hands. This car had one of those little butterfly windows that cars used to have in front of the main window. That window was not locked and was slightly ajar. With my left hand, I reached through that window and with what I think must have been divine intervention, found the handle to the door latch, pulled it, and with my right hand on the outside handle, the door popped open. At this moment, Dennis was bringing the handgun around to either shoot himself or me. I didn't know which. Remembering my basic training where we had practiced taking a weapon away from another person, I dove into the vehicle, across Dennis's lap, grabbed the muzzle of the gun, and with all my strength twisted it in the opposite direction over Dennis's right shoulder. With his finger on the trigger, as the weapon was pointed into the back seat, it went off. A 45 caliber black powder pistol inside that little Volkswagen sounded like a cannon. It was deafening. After the weapon went off, Dennis seemed to lose his fight, and with the assistance of the other ranger, we were able to safely secure Dennis and take him to professional help. The happy ending to this story is that Dennis did get help, and to the best of my knowledge has led a full and productive life. Not a typical day for a ranger, but one that I will certainly not forget. My second story is called Yo S. Victor's What? In the early 90s, I served as the chief ranger of Big Bend National Park, a big, wild mountain desert park on the Mexican border along the Rio Grande. Big Bend is the most remote park in the lower 48, and prior to 9/11, was very much an informal border with Mexico. Prior to my arrival at Big Bend, there had been a brutal double homicide at a remote campsite in the park near the border. The investigation suggested this was a cross-border drug deal that had gone bad, but the joint U.S.-Mexico investigation had not yielded any suspects. To some extent, the investigation had taken a strange turn, with the National Park Service investigator bringing in psychics and other unusual things. The superintendent had hired me, in part, to get the investigation back on track, as it was getting a lot of press and had given the park a bit of a black eye. I should mention that when I went to Big Bend, the superintendent of the park, who was fluent in Spanish, was very gracious about taking me around and introducing me to everyone, including officials on the Mexican side of the park. When he was making his introductions, he would always be sure to introduce me as the jefe, the chief of the Rangers. And while I had taken some Spanish in high school, that had been many years ago, and I had not really used it. So all this jefe business was new to me. One day I got a call from the front desk at the visitor center, which was co-located with park headquarters, that two senior-level Mexican federales were at the front desk. They said they wanted to meet with Victor, the National Park Service criminal investigator, who worked for me and who had been handling the homicide investigation. The front desk had determined that it was Victor's day off and that he was out of the area. But the staff thought the federales might have some important new information about the double homicide, since they had driven from the interior of Mexico and had actually driven their vehicle across the Rio Grande River, where there was no bridge, to get to the park. The staff wanted to know if I wanted to meet with them in Victor's absence. I said, of course, and went to the front desk to meet them. I quickly determined that neither of these two guys spoke a word of English, so made arrangements to have one of the park interpreters, who was working the front desk that day, come back to my office to translate for us. His name was Gus. Gus told me, Jim, give me a few minutes to find someone to take over the front desk, and I'll meet you in your office. In the meantime, I motioned for the two federales to follow me. Now I should take a moment to describe these two guys to you. They were both huge. Neither one of them could have passed for an NFL lineman. They looked tough, and they made no effort to appear friendly to me. It was clear they were all business. I invited them to sit in these two desk chairs I had in my office directly in front of my desk. I took a seat behind my desk, expecting Gus to arrive any second. What felt like minutes and minutes went by. No Gus. These two huge guys are just sitting directly across the desk from me, this gringo they don't know, in total silence. It was extremely awkward for all of us. But here's where I made my mistake. I decided these two guys are never going to be comfortable talking to me and sharing the information they've come all this way to share unless they understand that I am the chief ranger. I am Victor's chief, therefore I can be trusted. So, as the awkward silence continued, I dug deep into my memory of high school staff and my introductions by the park superintendent a few months earlier, and I decided that while we're waiting for Gus, I'm going to tell these two guys two things: my name and that I am Victor's chief. I think I'm okay with the first sentence. Mi nombre es Jim Northup. Then I'm racking my brain to remember that Spanish term for chief. And I think I have it. I'm a little nervous, but I think I have it, so I tell these two guys with authority, Mi nombre es Jim Northup, yo es Victor's huevos. Thought that was funny, but they didn't. The next few minutes were very interesting. I remember these two guys looking at me in total deadpan, expressionless, and each of them appearing to resist the temptation to look at the other and break into laughter. I didn't know what I said, but at that moment, Gus walked in. The conversation went on for 10 minutes or so, totally in Spanish, of course, when it must have occurred to Gus that he should explain to these two guys who I am, and that I am the chief of the Rangers, the Jefe. The moment he says the word Jefe, I think to myself, aha, that's the word I was on. As it turns out, they didn't have any critical information to share, and after they left, I asked Gus, hey Gus, what does huevos mean? And Gus said, well Jim, the literal translation is eggs, but to most people along the border, it means testicles. So I became rather famous for telling two Mexican federales, my name is Jim Northup, and I am Victor's testicles. So much for a gringo chief ranger. My third and final story is called You Are Nothing But a Piece of, or It's Hard to Do Community Relations When the World's on Fire. My final job working for the National Park Service was as the superintendent of Shenandoah, right next door. Some of you may recall that in April and May of 2016, the park experienced the second largest fire in its history, the Rocky Mountain Fire, which burned over 10,000 acres, mostly in Rockingham County, south of here. When the Rocky Mountain Fire started, it was in a very remote part of the park. It grew quickly, but we were aggressively managing the fire to keep it inside the park, away from any structures, and to reduce the risk to the firefighters. There were hundreds of firefighters building fire lines to contain the fire. There were 6 aircraft dropping water on hot spots and protecting structures both in and outside the park. Unfortunately, when the public heard that we were managing the fire rather than immediately suppressing the fire, which would have been impossible, some members of the public thought that meant we were just letting the fire burn uncontrolled. And I found myself in a bit of a hot seat as the park superintendent. The governor showed up at the incident command post to find out what was going on. a local congressman showed up, and I was doing a number of media interviews trying to assure the public that the fire was being well managed. In addition, as the fire grew bigger and more visible, it began to have some fairly significant smoke impacts all the way to Washington, D.C. But near the park, a community called Beldor Hollow was enveloped in thick smoke for several days, and the residents were pretty upset. I personally traveled to Beldor Hollow. Fire was right on the edge of the community, and the smoke was thick. It was easy to understand why people were so concerned, and we poured a lot of resources into protecting Beldor Hollow. A few days later, I told our fire management officer I wanted to tour the entire perimeter of the fire to assess the overall situation. So one morning, after the morning briefing, where all the firefighters get their work assignments for the day, I jumped in the front seat of the fire management officer's truck, and we began our tour. We took with us the regional fire management officer and a highly respected fire ecologist who works for the Park Service. They were both in the back seat of the truck. As part of our tour, we drove into Beldor Hollow, the community that had been so enveloped in smoke just a few days earlier. Now, Beldor Hollow is a very small community in Rappahannock County. It is surrounded by the national park on 3 sides, and suffice it to say that not everybody in the community is fond of the park. When we arrived, it was a beautiful blue sky day. The fire had been contained in that area, and the nearest area of active fire was now miles away. The community was completely smoke-free, and not a single structure had burned in Beldor Hollow. As we drove through the community, I saw an older gentleman out walking his dog. So I told the fire management officer who was driving to pull up next to the gentleman so I could chat with him. As we pulled up to him, I said, "Good afternoon, sir. You must be feeling much better about things in Beldor Hollow today." Coming up to my window so he could hear better, he said, "What?" So I repeated, "You must be feeling a lot better about things in Beldor Hollow today. A few days ago, you had fire everywhere, and you were completely smoked in. And today, there is no fire to be seen, and it's a beautiful day." Thinking we were all firefighters because of the truck we were in, he said, "Well, yes, thanks to you firefighters, but with no thanks to that damn park." Now, of course, I should have said, "Yes, sir, thank you, have a nice day." But thinking I'm pretty good at community relations and feeling good about how things had been going overall, I said to the gentleman, "Well, sir, I guess I should tell you that my name is Jim Northup and I am the superintendent of the park." I watched as his blood pressure obviously increased, the red color rising first from his neck into his face and then into his forehead. At which point he leaned forward and said, "Then you ain't nothing but a piece of shit," and walked away. I never had a chance to say another word to the gentleman. All I could do was turn around to all my colleagues in the truck, who had been watching with some interest to see how a superintendent builds rapport with the public, and say, "Well, that went well, don't you think?" I think later they had a pretty good laugh. So there you have it, the life of a ranger. Some days doing heroic things, some days getting tongue-tied, and some days, despite your best effort, just being told you're a piece of...
Never said goodbye. It is December 31st, 1971, the height of the Vietnam War, the age of Aquarius. I'm 19, and I'm just getting to know Mike Sands. He is New Hampshire's first conscientious objector, a bit of a flirt, a person of interest, but not a boyfriend, or at least not yet.
I'm watching Betsy from a distance. Still an awkward young male. We're part of the first class at Hampshire College, a progressive alternative in Massachusetts. Camp Hamp, as we called it. Most of us came to Hampshire because we weren't going anywhere else. We were a strange assortment of high school students.
Michael's invited me to his home in New Hampshire for a New Year's Eve party. It's a long drive from Connecticut, and the snow is coming down hard and fast. The last mile of the trip up New Canada Road is very steep, narrow, and slippery. Not my favorite driving conditions. And it's very dark, and I'm just beginning to think, why did I do this? When I see a faint glow in the distance. Buried in a 4-foot snowbank is a quaint Cape Cod house with a green door, and in the shadows lurks a much larger complex or something. Snow coming down. I knock, no one answers. And so I enter a cozy brick-floored room with a blazing fire and a zoftig woman, one of my favorite words, Yiddish for pleasantly plump, succulent, juicy, appears. And she's my height, curly brown hair, slightly sweaty, and all she's wearing is a big Turkish towel and a large diamond floral wedding ring. And she reaches out and says, "Hi, I'm Kao, Mike's mom. You must be Mikey's girl." And before I can answer, she asks me point blank, "Are you two sleeping together? Or do you want to be in the girls' dorm room?" I've entered the cult of Kao, and the woman in front of me is my future mother-in-law.
I'm oblivious. Our house has always been dominated by my mother. She's loud, opinionated, but loving and concerned with people. She often embarrasses me with her pronouncements or actions, but she's happiest with a large crowd that she's assembled and can direct. Direct is important. To this end, every Thanksgiving and New Year's, 75 to 100 plus people come to visit for 3 to 5 nights. Just a small group to share hikes, touch football, skiing, meals, drinks, and most importantly, conversations.
Michael thinks all of this is normal. The multi-day house parties, the bigger-than-life mom, the 20,000 square foot house that could accommodate 100 for a sit-down dinner. Really? With the blessing of Mike's dad, Wynn, a doctor and head of Dick's House, the health service for Dartmouth College, Kao has converted a small New England farmhouse into Party Central. For a large swath of the eastern seaboard, an invitation to New Year's is very coveted. And in my memory, what stands out most is the 3-story atrium that included a heated indoor pool and the passion pit, a sunken nook with wall-to-wall blue shag rug that for some reason reminded me of Laugh-In. There's also a Finnish sauna, because the Sands love all things Scandinavian, and parties start around a Hans Wegner table that comfortably seats 50 with multi-course meals, gourmet meals, dancing into the wee hours, and swimming in a sub-zero spring-fed pond, which often requires breaking through the ice. And the height of a ragged weekend is being toasted and roasted by the president of ABC News, which goes something like this.
Eve, you're in the running for Best Guest Award. But sitting up front like that and laughing at every bad joke that you've heard tonight makes you seem a bit too eager. Sit back. Be a little bit more aloof. It'll help your chances.
And if you're really lucky, you might win the Best Guest Award. For the female Best Guest, the award is a flying penis on a large gold chain. And for the best male guest, a small miniature coffin with a spring out of which pops a large phallic symbol. There's even a plaque inscribed with the winner's name and the year they won the award. And if that isn't enough entertaining for the year, Kao and Wynn would entertain us all in the summers on Chappaquiddick at the Sands Chappie Hilton. which are its equally wild and crazy time. The summer begins with assembling a motley caravan that includes a rusty de chevaux, several Citroëns, a horse trailer with ponies and chickens because Mike's sister Teo loved to ride her pony, and Wynn likes fresh eggs for breakfast. There are pickups filled with cases of liquor because liquor is cheaper in New Hampshire, and in those days it was still possible to take across state lines. And Ko, knowing that this is way too big a production for 1 or 2 people, hires 5 or 6 babysitters, mostly from Dartmouth College, who eagerly report for duty with Mother Sands. And who wouldn't love a summer job that begins with a nude swim at dawn in the Wastegui waves, a hearty breakfast, maybe a few chores because Ko loved clotheslines and towels that were dried by the sun, followed by a day at the beach with peanut butter sandwiches and whiskey sours.
This isn't normal? I think Betsy's right. There is something different going on here. There was a quirkiness and a drive about Mom, even in her younger years. She never felt bound by social norms and was definitely a free spirit. A formative experience had been her education at the infamous Dartington Hall School in South Devon, England. When she married Dad, 15 years her senior, they never looked back. Sometimes I felt like I was sharing her not only with my siblings, but with an extended family that arrived for every holiday.
It was 70s Camelot, and though Ko was not exactly Guinevere, more like a combination of Bella Abzug, Julia Childs, and Ethel Kennedy. She was brazen, outrageous, clever, a cordon bleu cook, a force to be reckoned with, and I loved her fierce defense of those less fortunate, her free spirit, and her speaking truth to power. At the same time, she could push my buttons. The endless big dinners, obligation to be on duty 24/7, the late nights, they got tiring after a while. And there was this unspoken expectation, particularly of the women in the group, that everyone pitch in, and frankly, I felt put upon. Many was a time when I found myself with a few other women straightening the kitchen at 1 a.m. or setting the table for 50 or more. And she could be opinionated and often saw things as black and white. She had this blanket dislike of anything German, which may have come from having spent her teen years in pre-war Britain worrying about German bombers overhead, but a bit problematic given my last name. I know I can have strong opinions that are exasperating for my family, and seeing Ko was like looking in the mirror.
Betsy was incredibly frustrated by my mother's contradictions, particularly early in our relationship. As the eldest son, Betsy wanted me to fix it, or at least provide a logical explanation. But I didn't have that capacity. I didn't have those answers. There's no logic here. I'm the man in the middle. Am I son or am I husband? And Mom did have a few habits. It could be both endearing and embarrassing. She loves to watch and comment on people, and she was an eavesdropper par excellence. While it served her well as she got older and had less ability to converse, it could be embarrassing when she became too obvious, particularly in a public space like a restaurant. She could put people on the spot and had the mouth of a longshoreman. The first time Betsy's parents and family came to visit, it was a holiday weekend. We all sat down at the big dinner table, and Mom had made one of her dessert specialties, creme brulee, for 50. Wine was flowing, there was much lively conversation, and no one was paying any attention to her dessert.
Or her.
After politely telling everyone to begin eating and getting no response, she said in a loud, booming voice, "Eat your fucking dessert." Fucking, not a word often heard in the Dietel household. Bill and Linda, to this day, tell the story about the obligatory thank you letter from Fritz, Betsy's youngest brother, age 10 at the time, to my mother, thanking her for her fucking dessert.
She could swear with the best of them. As time passed, though, K.O. definitely got herself into messes, often with a scatological bent. One of the times I remember most clearly was her visit to Kenya. In 1980, Michael and I moved to a rural village in northern Kenya, not far from Lake Victoria and the Ugandan border. Michael was doing his doctoral research, I was doing my master's research, and I was a new mother. The drive to our house was absolutely terrifying. We were 8 hours west of Nairobi, and you had to cross the Rift Valley on a road built by Italian prisoners of war. People drove like maniacs, and we often saw charred remains of a lorry or a dead body on the side of the road. The Ugandan war was in full swing, and there were innumerable army checkpoints. Like, remember those tire slashing gates that you pass when you leave your rental car? Those were all along the road, manned by young men with submachine guns. Wynn and K.O. announced they were coming for a visit, and while we were delighted at the thought, it was not exactly convenient. We were trying to get settled into our new home, which had no running water despite modern plumbing, and Michael was in the thick of his research, often away from the house for days at a time. And I was struggling with being a first-time mom in a village where my closest neighbor lived in a mud hut and only spoke Swahili or Luo. The day arrived and I was nominated to pick up the in-laws. With Will, less than 2 months old, in tow, I drove 8 hours to Nairobi. Now, unbeknownst to us, in those days there were no computers and no cell phones. Wynn, who at the time was in his late 70s, had had a series of strokes. And when I arrived to pick them up in Nairobi airport late at night, Wynn was in a wheelchair, happy as could be, but K.O. was behind him, pushing him, and was bent over like Quasimodo, having pulled out her back, which was what she always did whenever she was under stress. I was frightened, overwhelmed, and not very happy. And then we began the trek westward the next morning. All was going well until K.O. announced that she'd eaten something and desperately needed a bathroom. We stopped at a local petrol station and she hobbled to the loo. And Wynn, Will, and I waited, and we waited, and we waited some more. And after some time, I decided I'd better check on K.O. From the loo, I could hear a faint cry for help. Unable to stand up due to her back, terrified of touching the white-tiled stained walls, K.O. hunched over a one-holer in a state of complete distress and undress. I managed to help get her up and out and back into the car, and breathing a sigh of relief, we ventured on. But I remember thinking, this is not what I bargained for, and it's going to be a long vacation with my in-laws.
I got back from the field about the same time they arrived at the house and listened to the whole story. Typical of me, I didn't recognize the stresses involved. Betsy. My reaction? Wow, what a grand adventure.
Thanks a lot. How could he not think I was stressed by all of this? With each passing year, K.O. became more challenging, and taking care of Wynn became increasingly difficult. She was so endearing, and there was a vulnerability, a self-absorption that made me sad. I missed the good old days when life seemed so carefree and easier.
After Dad died, Camelot died as well. We didn't talk about it, it just happened. Ragged Edge went on the market, as did the Chappie Hilton. Ragged finally sold at a fraction of the price Mom believed it was worth. And Mom moved into a smaller 3-bedroom house in Lebanon, New Hampshire. Too proud to move to a retirement community, she insisted on an independent living situation. This ultimately caused an enormous unspoken stress for and among all of my siblings and our partners. I say unspoken because our family talked about events, facts, people, politics, gossip. but we didn't talk about feelings and emotions. This was hard for Betsy to accept.
It was hard. I'd grown up in a family where we spent a lot of time talking, getting things out in the open, and I kept thinking that if KO would just do the same, it would help. But my suggestions fell on deaf ears. KO was so generous and so gracious, but there was no good time to talk. There were always people around, grandchildren, children, friends, friends of friends, people we didn't even know that came to the door. And with all of them came their foibles, their faults, and their frailties, all good distractions from dealing with feelings. There was always another seat at the table, another spectacular meal, and people just never wanted to say goodbye. And so there was never a time to talk about what might be missing, what people might be feeling. But when all was said and done, KO, with Wynn's blessing, encouragement, created a safe and loving space for so many people. Young people battling with their parents, gays who had not come out of the closet to their families, people who were trying to find themselves, people who needed healing, Europeans looking for a home in the U.S.
While having a crowd around all the time was intense, Betsy and I saw how rich and wonderful it could be, and to this day, can't resist welcoming another friend of a friend, friend of a family member, or friend of someone we've never met that shows up on our doorstep.
And when the time came, I was unable to say goodbye. And that's why I think I agreed to do this talk. I guess it's my way of saying goodbye to KO.
Next time, let's talk about your family.